Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Brianna Approved Podcast. We have a very special guest today on the show. I'm so excited. We have Vanessa Bennett, a holistic psychotherapist, mindfulness, and codependency coach. She has a master's in counseling psychology with an emphasis in depth psychology, which I had to Google because that was really interesting, and we will probably touch on that. Vanessa also teaches meditation and yoga, so she is a yogi badass. She leads retreats and workshops and also teaches a series of classes. So if you're a lifelong learner, you can learn about things like how codependency affects our relationships. And she also has a podcast of her own called Cheaper Than Therapy Podcast. And we know that times are tough for some people, so I would definitely listen to that. And there's more. Vanessa is also an author, a mother, and she's created an online course called Mindfulness, a way to reduce anxiety and depression. Vanessa, welcome to the podcast.
God, when somebody lists it out like that, I'm like, I'm tired.
It is horrifying to listen to your own bio back to you, but it is truly also a test of like, okay, how can I'm so kind to others. How can I be kind to myself and listen to
Just
all my
sit and hear it.
Let me just take it in. Yes, I think I originally found you on, I think your husband has a podcast, I believe, and you were maybe a guest on his, and I was doing a deep dive into codependency at the time, and you are like the codependency queen, I have now found out after doing a deep dive on you. So I want to take a step back. I'm sure you've talked about this ad nauseum, but I would love to hear your definition of codependency, because now everybody is a health and wellness coach and everybody's a therapist and everybody's a codependency coach. And I'm sure that can be frustrating because you did put in the time and went to school and all of that. So I would love to hear from your professional experience how you would maybe explain to somebody what codependency is, maybe signs that you have codependency tendencies, or even like, oh, that might be a sign that you're in a codependent relationship.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think everything you said is true. Like there is a little bit of frustration, I think, from a lot of my therapist friends, like those of us who did, do the masters and put in 3,500 hours and do all the things. Because yeah, I mean, nowadays everybody is some kind of like coach and whatever. And I also kind of balance that with, we have a lot of hurt people in our world right now, and we need as many healers as we can get. So I'm also very almost like thankful for social media and the way that it's opened us up to, people who just have different gifts, right? Because obviously we're not for everybody. But codependency really has become my jam in the last few years. It's not new for me. I've been on my own recovery journey since I was about 25. I was myself in a very codependent relationship, started going to therapy, started going to Al-Anon, and really just digging in. And then over the last few years that I've been in a healthy relationship, started realizing like, oh shit, this is still there. And so I started doing a deeper dive. And I'll tell you, there's two things. So I'll give you my definition of codependency, and it is really this simple. If you're good, I'm good. If you're not good, I'm not good. So codependent behavior is just that simple. Your emotional state, your sense of self, your sense of wholeness, your sense of value is based on somebody else. It's based outside of yourself, right? And what I will say, and this part I think is kind of a little bit more of like the radical view that I have of codependency that is very different than where we've come with the codependent research that kind of started in like the 70s and the 80s. We are all codependent.
Yes.
Every one of us. It's the air we breathe. It is how we are raised. It is Cinderella and Prince Charming. It is in everything that we see. It's in our home relationships when we're growing up. It's what we're taught love should look like. And so, it's in our relationships with our children. It's in our relationships with our friends. And so I don't say that as like a womp womp, doomsday, you're never going to have healthy relationships. I say that first of all, to take the stigma away. We don't look at codependency anymore as the simple, like, quote, wives of alcoholic husbands, which is really where it started. And I mean, thank goodness for that research, because it was groundbreaking. But it's not that simple anymore. I think we really need to start looking at it in a different way and start realizing that there are unhealthy codependent behavior patterns that every one of us have. Each is different for everybody. It shows up differently for everybody. And how can we individually start to address what it looks like for you, right? So how your codependency manifests in order to slowly shift into a more interdependent space in relationships.
Oh my God, you must be a mind reader because I want to ask you about this idea between the difference between interdependence and codependence. Because to
Mhm.
your point, I think everything that we deal with, whether it's mental health, physical health, whatever, there's always a spectrum and a sliding
Yep.
scale. And I think relationships, again, whether it's platonic or romantic, are generally mirrors and reflections of things either we need to still work on or whatever it is. So I think sometimes we pick people or we attract in people to, where we are in our spectrum that maybe makes that level go a little bit higher or can soothe that a little bit. And so I think that's important. But how would you maybe define the difference between interdependence and codependency? And can there kind of be a little bit of like a layover with those?
So yeah, the way that I look at it is it's a little bit like you said, it's a spectrum, right? So you've got kind of codependency on one side of the spectrum. You have hyper independence on the other side of the spectrum, which by the way, hyper independence and codependence are really just two sides of the same coin.
Mm.
And then you have interdependence kind of somewhere in the middle, right? And like everything we talk about in mental health and in therapy, our life is a process of swinging from one side of the spectrum to the other and hopefully achieving balance here and there.
Yeah.
Right? It's never going to be something that you achieve and then just maintain your homeostasis forever, because that's just not how humans work. Like, we are very black and white creatures. We do tend to live in extremes. But really, when I look at interdependence, and this has really been, I would say, just in the last maybe year or two, where I've started going in terms of research, it really means this. There's a spiritual teacher. He passed away a while ago, but a lot of people know him if you follow any kind of Buddhist teachings. Alan Watts, who was really big in the 70s, and he really talked a lot about interdependence. And the reason why I bring him up is because the image that he used that I thought was the most helpful for me anyway, was the image of the bee and the flower.
Mm.
So we talked about how the bee and the flower, and actually all of nature, but he used that as a very specific example, live in interdependence, right? It's an interdependent relationship. They are their own sovereign beings with their own ways of living, their own ways of showing up in the world, and yet they need each other to survive. Right. And so when you look at human beings like that, like, we are social creatures, we do need other people, we need connection. Right. And yet, where we slip into more of that codependency is when the kind of line blurs around your autonomy as a person. And it's like, I don't know where I end and where you begin, right?
Mm.
Emotionally, physically, all the things. And so part of the work of shifting into more of an interdependence relationship, or just relationships, plural, is starting to pay attention to those lines, right? Like, how can I start to build a stronger sense of self, or just a sense of self, period? Because for a lot of codependents, they don't even have one,
Yes.
so that I am very clear. This is me. This is you, right? I am worthy. I am valuable. I have, needs that are worthy of being expressed. I have opinions. I have all of these things that are just central to who I am, and they are not changed by, affected by, disrupted by another person.
Love that. And I love that you touched on that idea too, because I think, and what I've noticed with myself as well, like, again, advice is always a form of nostalgia. I think the things that I've learned in my own research is that there were kind of three main buckets. It was like self worth stuff, control, or a sense of control, right? Like being manipulative, actually low key. And
Yep.
then, I think also trying to, prevent collateral damage like down the road. And so, how much of that do you think this false sense of control comes from, like, maybe self worth? Maybe is it more so like you have low self esteem, or is it maybe from some other triggers that you seem to see that trickle into these same kinds of buckets that ultimately manifest as a quote codependent kind of personality trait?
Yeah. In my experience, I don't know that they're very like clear cut, right?
Mm.
I feel like there's so much overlap with this stuff. When I do, like, once a month or once every 2 months, I'll run my codependency 101 class in the group that I run, just for kind of anybody who's new, anybody who wants a refresher. And I go through what I like to call my like laundry list of codependent tendencies, right? And there's like 25 on there that I touch on, and there are more, but it's only a 15-minute class. And basically, I kind of like bang, 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 rapid fire through all of these. Most people are like, holy shit, I didn't even think about that as a codependent tendency or a behavior. But the way I also like to describe it is, you might not say yes and check the box of all 20 of these. Like you might, the way that I looked at it when I was kind of realizing it in myself and my own relationships was like, oh, in my relationship with my mom, I struggle with 2, 5, and 9. In my relationship with my romantic partner, it's like 12, 13, and 14. And then with my friends or with work, it's like 7 and 12, right? So it can be very different and manifest differently because different people trigger different responses in us, right? There's different levels of intimacy. So I'm not going to be the same at work that I am in my intimate relationship because I don't have as much invested. There's not as much fear there of being, abandoned or exposed or whatever the fear is. So I do think it shows up differently. The control piece is a big one. And so I, in the research that I've done and also working with clients, the vast majority of people who do develop codependent tendencies, and I'm saying we pretty much all do have some sort of chaos in their upbringing, right? And chaos is obviously a very broad term, and I use it broadly for a reason because everyone's upbringing is different. But it really has to do with it's like a byproduct of parenting, meaning there's such a generational way that the generation above us and the generation above them parented, yes. Right? Yes. Children should be seen and not heard. If I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. Go, I can't handle you right now. Go over there. When you've calmed down, you can come out of your room, right? It was very much this way of being like, emotions are not welcome here. Your experience is not valid. As a matter of fact, I will give you your experience. I will tell you what your experience should be. And so many of those kind of parenting quips, if you will, 100% develop codependent behaviors, because what am I telling my child? Your inner compass, your sense of what you think you know internally is wrong. Let me tell you what is right. Don't trust yourself. Trust me. Trust an external source, right? And it's very chaotic and it leads to a lack of control, a feeling of control. And so what am I going to do when I grow up? I'm going to try to control in any way I can. I'm not going to believe my internal sense of self because clearly it doesn't know what the hell it's talking about, right? So it's like such a direct A plus B equals C when you look at parenting. And I'm fascinated actually to see, I know you're kind of like a fellow research nerd. I'm fascinated to see what this next generation will turn out like, only because I think me as a parent of a 2-year-old now, our generation has swung so far over into like the helicopter parenting, yes. Which has its own downfalls. Yes. So God only knows these poor kids, what they're going to turn.
I know. And it's so interesting too, because I do see this kind of parallel correlation with, of course, control tendencies and then perfectionism. And to your point, 100%. People only like to think of it, I think, in such very specific themes, like, well, to your, like, this only is triggered by my dad or my mom or a boyfriend. And I think it's easier sometimes to put a label on trauma, chaos, and like what you just said. So I do also, I don't have kids yet, but I worry. I was just joking with my cousins about this. Like, I worry about now, like, our parents did the best that they could with the tools that they had. Like, I grew up in an Italian like household. You didn't talk about your feelings. They weren't bad parents, you know what I mean? But that obviously
just what they knew.
Right. It's just what we did. And so I think that's so interesting to see as well, because it is now such the quote woke generation. Everyone's getting canceled. It's like, okay, but again, healing is never found in extremities, and also research advancements is never found in extremities. So I can imagine how frustrating that is for you on the client side of things, but also again, now having to navigate this other sub profession of like TikTok and Instagram, and people only want 10 seconds of healing. And you're like, right, but this is like 30 years of compounded stuff you have going on. So like, you're not going to get it from a quote trauma coach in 10 seconds, and totally. That's, I'm sure, frustrating for you.
Yeah. I mean, the level of unpacking that we're trying to do in this like way that we've now become as a society, this very like ADD, instant gratification, kind of like Amazon society that we all are now. And it's like, you're trying to apply that to healing. And I mean, as you know, it doesn't work. Like, yeah, you can start to conceptually understand this stuff through these Instagram videos. Now take those conceptual understandings and now start the healing work, because they're different, right?
Absolutely. It's like, now what are you going to do? Great. We put a label on it, which is amazing for a lot of the analytical people. Like, it makes, I think, our brains feel safer. We feel like we belong to a tribe. But now what are we going to do about that? I would love to hear, since we touched on this a little bit, because I think no one talks about this enough. If you have had a string of, let's say, unhealthy relationships, codependent, chaotic energy, whatever it is, no one talks about the healthy relationship after those relationships, right? And I think it's a really difficult transition for a lot of people. And so how can somebody even begin to learn to develop a new or acquire a new liking to that kind of healthy relationship when they might say like, well, there's just not this, or they're comparing it, or
It's
again, like,
boring.
how does somebody even begin to do those steps if you're like, this is all I know and this is familiar and comfortable, but we know that doesn't always equal healthy.
Yeah, I mean, look, our nervous systems to a certain extent become addicted to the chaos, right? They become addicted to what our nervous system believes is love. And for many of us who did grow up in a chaotic household, and by the way, the reason why I use chaos again, I use it as a broad term for a reason. Like chaos in your home could have just meant that like mom and dad didn't really have a lot of tools. And so there was a lot of screaming and slamming doors. And so that produces some sort of chemical reaction in your brain and in your nervous system, right? As a child of like not feeling safe or like wanting it to calm down or wanting to fix it. And so then that internal feeling that you get is something that you become addicted to and start to translate as this is what love feels like, right? And so it could be something that's simple. It doesn't have to be massive trauma and abuse, right? I think that's important for people to understand. Or it could be cold shoulder, right? Like nobody talks about it. People get pissed off and then everyone stops talking for 24 hours and then we come back together and pretend like everything is fine. That becomes a pattern and then a feeling internally that we become addicted to. And so you take that out, you search for that in your external relationships, again, mostly friend and romantic relationships, right? And then you can't understand why they're not healthy, right? And the same pattern keeps happening over and over again. So now let's hope that you are somebody who goes on this inner journey. You start to take radical responsibility for your 100%, right? Because hate to break it to you, but when you got a string of relationships that all look the same, you're the common denominator there, right? Like,
Yes.
not to victim blame, but like you got to start taking radical responsibility. It is the only way to heal those kind of traumatic wounds, right? So once you start doing that and you find yourself in healthier relationships, for a lot of people, there is a point where you feel bored. You don't feel stimulated. You know, you think, oh, like there's just no chemistry. There's not a match here. And it is a different experience for everyone. There's no one size fits all. But for so many of my clients, a lot of the work is you got to sit in that feeling long enough to see if it truly is just your nervous system's response to calm, which it's not familiar with, or if it truly is like, yes, this person is not a match for me. I can't tell you that, right? Like you're the only one that can tell yourself that, but you do have to give it long enough to find out if that's true. And I will say with my partner and I, it took both of us almost a year before we figured it out, because for that whole first year, in our own way, we were both questioning, I don't know, this doesn't feel like this doesn't feel like that, you know, this is missing, that's missing, she's great, he's great, but, right? And here we are, you know, 4.5 years and a baby in, and it 100% is exactly the relationship that I'm supposed to be in. But had I not got past that first year of the doubt, I wouldn't be where I am.
I think that's so amazing that you shared that, because I think sometimes there's this added perceived pressure of whatever you're a quote expert in, whether it's,
Mm-hmm.
mental health, working out, whatever. Like people expect that you're going to be perfect as well, right? It's like the idea of being a personal trainer and like you have to look a certain way, or you think you have to look a certain way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like to have two therapists essentially be together to be like, "Oh no, it was amazing and we knew, or we're going to parent our kids perfectly." And it's like, we're still human as well. But I love that you brought up this idea, because I know you wrote an article about needs versus wants in a relationships, and I do think that some people will have this defense mechanism where they think they're saying they need something, and then they'll say, but XYZ, I wanted this, but they're 1 inch shorter, or I didn't like the way their shoelaces looked, or right. We
Mm-hmm.
start to make these crazy little things as a defense mechanism because it feels like, well, this is safe and I don't like this, right? So how does somebody begin to differentiate what a need is versus a want versus, ooh, this is a defense mechanism and maybe just an old tick that I need to kind of push through?
Yeah, you know, it's funny that you bring this up because I was just having this conversation with both my partner last night on our drive home from the beach with our little one, and then also my best girlfriend, who's also my podcast co-host last week, because the way that I'm starting to see needs is really starting to shift as well as I'm diving more into this world of interdependence and what does that look like. And so I'm like in it. I'm like kind of steeped in this conversation. The way that I understand it right now, and that could change, right? But the way that I look at it right now in my own relationship as well as with my clients is especially for a lot of us who come from more codependent backgrounds, because for many of us, we start out the gate not actually knowing what our needs are, because we're so externally focused, right? Most of us think that we know our intuition, but we actually don't. A lot of times what we think is our intuition is actually external voices that we've kind of internalized. And so for so much of the work in the beginning is actually creating a relationship to that sense of self, right? It's like learning to kind of turn up the audio dial, if you will, the volume on that intuition. And so with needs in particular, I have found personally, in the beginning especially, I was able to figure out what my need is only by backing into it. So I was only able to figure out what a need was when it wasn't met.
Oh,
Now that work requires a lot of self-awareness and a lot of mindfulness, because you have to really be able to tune into, number one, the feeling of resentment. Because here's what I will say, as codependents, we might have a hard time with a lot of emotions, naming emotions, getting overwhelmed by emotions. The one emotion I know for almost a fact that every one of us is really good at knowing what it feels like is resentment. We might as well just walk around with it like labeled on our foreheads. So getting really, really in touch with resentment, I would say, in order to establish like what are my needs, is actually kind of that first step. So why am I feeling resentment? And it doesn't have to be massive. It can be like the teeniest little whiff of resentment. It is an indication that you need to slow down, take a breath, go inward, question what's happening. What am I not getting? What's happening in this dynamic that I wish were different, whatever it might be. And then from that point of awareness, you can probably then have a conversation where, even if it's not articulated perfectly, here's my need. It could be something like, when the other day when you left to go to the gym, and I had the baby, I felt like this weird resentment. And at the time I didn't really notice it. So I just let you go and I tried to push it down, but I've been sitting with it and I'm thinking about it. And what I'm starting to realize is I'm not getting my physical needs met. Like, I need to start prioritizing myself, but I need your help in that. Like, I need you to take care of the baby for an hour, every other day so I can go to the gym. I have a hard time asking for that. So I'm asking you to help me with that. Right. So that's just like one example, especially a common example that I see a lot in like at least couples with young children. But you'll notice in that example how it was like, oh, okay, I'm feeling some sort of way. Let me just talk it out in an exploratory, curious way so that I can get to the need, even if I don't actually know clearly what that need is. And then sometimes by doing that over and over and over again, you'll get better at being like, oh no, this is clearly a need. Let me just put it out there, be super clear about it, but that doesn't happen overnight. That takes a lot of freaking practice.
yeah. And it's so funny that you said that, because it goes back to some of the things we were talking about in the original conversation, of that there are kind of these like underlying little, like I would call them pebbles of like self-worth, boundaries, people pleasing, right? Like control. So it's like, oh, but if I actually say my need, this might make somebody feel uncomfortable, or they're going to abandon me, or, you know what I mean? So it's like you have to really always be kind of going back in and out of like, right, this is what is the best, most loving thing for myself right now. And I have to worry about me, and almost asking for help at the same time, which shows like we think a perceived weakness, and it's not, because I think that actually is more vulnerable. And I think where you actually end up having a true deep connection with somebody and a partnership, as opposed to just maybe a relationship that's fleeting or just another Band-Aid codependent kind of cycle that we've gotten ourselves into.
Well, here's what I will say, Brett. I'm glad you said that, because like one of the things you said about I need to put myself first, one of the challenges that I constantly pose to people who are working through codependent tendencies is, you think you're protecting, you think you're helping, you think you're not rocking the boat. You're not. You're hurting. You're not helping. You're not showing up authentically, right? You're holding on to resentment. And I've actually said numerous times in my classes, like, if I'm on the receiving end of that, even if it's, let's just say it's warranted. Like, let's say I show up and I'm a total jerk to you, and I'm on the warranted end of like some pissed off feelings and resentment. If you're walking around holding on to that without expressing it to me, if I were that person, I'd be like, I don't want that shit. Like, don't give that to me. That's not a loving relationship where you carry and hold over somebody's head anger and resentment. right? Like a loving relationship is one in which I can show up and say, hey, this really hurt my feelings. I need to give this feedback to you, right? So that I can clear that air and walk away with that lightness, with that deeper connection, with that more solid sense of self, right? And connection to self. And so I think it's really important for a lot of us to understand most of the time when you think you're helping by not saying the thing and not being the authentic person, you're not, you're actually hurting.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, this is going to be one of my rapid fire questions I had to you, but I would love to hear your opinion on this now
Yeah.
because I think so many people, again, talk about this idea of our love languages, but
Mm-hmm.
also our communication styles, which goes back to childhood stuff. We didn't always have a say over that. And the way that we fight, because we can fight in
Mm-hmm.
healthy, productive manners. Which of those do you think actually is not more important, but maybe holds more value as you start to dig deeper in your own healing of attracting better partners?
Ooh, I don't know if I would put priority on one. I would say it's like a chemistry project of a little bit of all of it, you know. The book that my partner and I wrote that's coming out, actually pre-order starts in May. We touch on almost all of those as like an individual chapter, right? So in our journey, well, I mean, our continual journey, but our journey to becoming a couple, it's like we've had to really look at each of these categories and figure out where the overlap is, you know. And it does sound like a lot of work, and it is, but unfortunately that is just the par for, like, if you really truly want to have a more conscious, connected relationship, you do have to do some of this heavy lifting, and it doesn't go away, right? Is knowing my partner's love languages, knowing his communication style, knowing how he fights, knowing his backstory, knowing his history, knowing his traumas, knowing what he brings to the table, because all of that knowledge helps me not look at him as the enemy. It helps me understand that this is not personal, has nothing to do with me, actually. It's just him and his story, right? And so if I'm able to not personalize that, I can come to the table again, pulling from curiosity, trying to understand before being understood, right? And so I guess it's a long-winded way to not answer your question, which is like, I don't know that you can kind of put emphasis on any one of them, or if it's just kind of like an amalgamation of all of them. And I will say that sometimes one takes priority. Like sometimes in this moment, this feeling of disconnection that we're having, we can probably specifically relate it to love languages. Like, yeah. I have not given him enough words of affirmation in the last however many weeks. He's starting to feel the effects of that. I need to really pay attention. And in doing that, he will feel better. And so it might be as simple as saying, oh, it's this category. But I think for, at least for us, a lot of times it's like a little bit of this and a little bit of that and sprinkle of this.
Yeah. But that goes back to what you were saying, how we live in this like Amazon Prime culture where people
Yes.
want it in 2 seconds. And again,
Yes.
I don't know why people think that every relationship is supposed to be rainbows and butterflies. Like, I don't think that's a good sign when people are like, we never
No.
fight. I'm like, so that means you don't know how to have tough conversations or speak up or whatever it is. And I think that kind of goes back to compatibility of that question of maybe where we're like, okay, maybe there weren't butterflies and sparks and whatever. And that's not always a great, healthy sign. I think if a lot of people learn as they get older and you learn to date differently.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of that does go back into compatibility of, so love language, fight language. I think there's intellectual compatibility. Are there other buckets of compatibility that you see as you've gotten older and are in a more, I think a healthier relationship that you value more being older with, having a child together now that maybe you didn't value as much younger in relationships or when you were working through some of your, your own stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the things I've realized is that this idea of having compatible, whether it be love languages, fighting styles, all of that, I wonder sometimes, I'm starting to question if it truly is compatibility or if it's just, again, an understanding of self, an ability to take radical responsibility and an ability, and all of these things are a constant daily practice, by the way, to not personalize, right? And so I actually believe that none of those things have to actually match up in any way. My partner and I are probably opposite sides of the spectrum on everything you could possibly imagine. And I know that there is some kind of unconscious attraction in that for many of us, but it can be maddening and infuriating too, clearly. But because we're constantly practicing those three things that I was just mentioning, it doesn't necessarily feel like we have to be compatible in those areas, as long as we're constantly coming back to being open and curious about understanding where the other person is coming from and not personalizing. Now, having said that, what I do realize I do take much more seriously, I suppose, now than I did when I was younger, is a shared sense of creating something larger than myself. And I've always been somebody who dated very creative people, people who were super passionate and had a lot of drive, like a professional musician, like all of the things that were kind of external and putting amazing things out there. And I know now that is something I'm very attracted to. Clearly, I can clearly see that pattern in my life. But I think what's different now about my relationship with my partner, John, is that it's this idea that like it's like something larger than yourself, but it's like creating something that leaves a legacy, creating something that you're both super passionate about. There's like a shared language of passion that we both have that I don't know that I've ever found before. And I now realize that for me, that's the glue. Like, and that's my personal story, right? Like I'm an extrovert. I love to talk. I love to connect. And so for him and I, all the other things can be mismatched in a moment, right? And yet if we can have a super deep, passionate conversation, that 1 hour conversation will connect us back, in my opinion, will connect us back and keep me going. And so I think it's really important for everybody to figure out what that is, because so many of us are like, oh, let's look at this checklist. Like, they have to make 6 figures. They have to have, they have to have this. They have to be 6 feet tall. They have to this, a checklist. And it's all bullshit. None of that matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, that goes back to the wants that would be nice
wants versus needs.
Gotta have this kind of thing. And that was actually going to be one of my questions I had for you too, because so maybe somebody's listening to this and this resonates with them of like, okay, yeah, I'm working on sitting with this feels healthy, so I got to just be with that for a bit. You said it took you almost a year. So was there kind of a conversation that had, or a light bulb moment, or what would maybe be a sign that somebody could be like, okay, I've given this enough time, I've thrown enough time at this. Like, how do I know if it's time for me to still lean into that and give it more time, or for me to walk away because maybe it really just isn't an alignment for me, or it isn't a match? Like, what are maybe some things that people would want to pay attention to, or like what was, for you, maybe that was like, yeah, no, this is good. This year in, like, this was the day and I knew it clicked for me.
I don't think it was a clicking, honestly. I think that's hard to say because, again, it's like so different for everybody. I think for me, the way that I'm wired is I'm very much one of those people, like, if I say like, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do this thing. Like, that's just how I've always been. Right. And so when I met my partner, I was pretty clear that I knew he was meant to be in my life. I knew that I always like to say I like manifested him for a reason. And I didn't know that was going to be a forever or whatever it was. It could have been a very brief moment, but I knew he was meant to be there. I was meant to learn something from this relationship. So I leaned into that. A lot of my practice in relationships is very mindfulness based. And so it's very much like, am I enjoying this in the moment? Is this person making me feel happy right now? Yes. Like, am I laughing and enjoying myself? Yes. Am I feeling challenged in a good way? Yes. Does this feel uncomfortable in a way that feels like it's helping me grow? Yes. Like, and I'm constantly questioning that, right? Especially in the beginning of any relationship, even friends or work even. And so him and I struggled more because he was actually the one that was constantly spinning and looking for a quote unquote sign and for something to click. And I was doing the very like, I don't know what your problem is. Like, for me in this moment, it feels good. And that's enough for me right now. Right. Which I feel like is actually, if we're talking like heteronormative, I feel like most of the women are doing what he's doing when they come to me. Right. And most of the men are doing what I'm doing, especially women when you're like mid-30s and there's that kind of biological clock. I was like, listen, I'm good right now. That's enough. Our moment was he was constantly, there was like a bunch of cycles of him being ambivalent and like push pull and like, I'm in it and then I'm not sure. And I got to a place where about 10 or 11 months in, I basically was like, shit or get off the pot. Like, you're either invested in this or not. I'm not telling you I want to marry you. I'm not telling you I want to be in this forever. I'm telling you I want to be in this right now. You either say, I want to be in this right now, or you don't. And if you don't, bye-bye. Like, there's the door. I know my value enough to know I'm not begging somebody to want to hang out with me. I'm awesome and I'm great to hang out with. So like, you either want to hang out with me or you don't. That's fine,
Yes.
And I think it was in that moment where I like really pushed him and walked away. And I was like, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to see you. And he had a moment of like, oh my God, like, this is serious. She's really done.
Yeah.
And I think that was enough for him to be like, okay, I'm in it. Okay.
That's such a great mind shift. Cause that's kind of been my mantra for this year. I'm like, I know I'm amazing. I don't care if
Yeah.
they like me. Obviously, they're going to like me. I'm like, do I like me? And can I be my most authentic self? Do they bring out the best version of
Do
me?
I like me when I'm with them?
Yes,
That's a huge question. Actually, you saying that, that's something that a listener could take away. That
totally.
could be a question you ask yourself.
Yeah.
Do I like the me I am when I'm with this person?
Yeah. And that's tough because for so long, if you have struggled with whether that's self worth or again, all
Mm-hmm.
the same themes, it all goes back to, am I relying on an external validation,
Yes.
person, scenario, job, whatever image, which I think more people struggle with that now because of the fake social media world that we live in and all of
Mm-hmm.
that, where it's like, no, but this actually ultimately comes down to me. You can ask all your friends and read all the books and all the podcasts, but at the end of the day, to thy own self be true. You have to be able to say, like, and sit with that thought and be like, do I feel like my best, most authentic self? And if not, do I trust that something better will come along because I am amazing? And that
Well,
does,
I
I
would
think,
say
take
in
time.
between those two questions, you might ask why.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I not feel like I'm being my most authentic self? Like, because
Yeah.
here's the thing, it might not be about the other person.
Yes,
That
it
might still
rarely
be
is.
that might still be your shit.
Yeah.
And so in which case I would say that that question that you just answered, if you're answering no, I still don't think the answer is, well, clearly we're not meant to be together then and I need to bail.
Yeah.
I think there's another layer there, which is like, why is it that I'm not being my most authentic and best self right now?
Yeah.
Because that might be all about you. And if you really dig in and do some work around that, then this person might actually still be great for you, but
Yeah.
you're functioning out of fear, you're functioning out of old wounding, you're functioning out of your abandonment stuff, right?
Mhm.
And so they might be a really amazing mirror for you to go deeper if you give it that opportunity.
Yeah. And so many people, I think, because we live in this instant gratification of, well, there's one thing I didn't like, so I'll just get back out there,
Oh
or
yeah.
again, this perceived perfection or whatever it is. And anything in life takes work. Like, I don't know why that got canceled over the
Yeah.
past few years, that like nothing amazing takes work anymore. But I think you value more what you actually worked for on both people. And to your point
Mm-hmm.
as well, like you want to build something with somebody that like you're going to have a lot of conversations with. That partner is going to color every area of your life, your finances, your decisions about maybe your children, your education. So like you better make sure that both of you can answer those questions, and to your point, keep asking the why, even if it's uncomfortable for a little bit, or you have to be like, you know what, I was toxic in that situation and that's on me and I got to work on my shit.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing too, we all change. Like that's another thing that I'm realizing working with couples over the years, that nobody wants to really admit, which is like you're not the same person now than you were most likely when you met that partner.
Yeah.
First of all, thank God. Right. I
Yes.
hope that I'm never the same person 3, 4, 5 years on the road, because I am
Yeah.
on this like journey to continue to grow and evolve. Stop expecting that other person to stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
Stop expecting that other person, once they've quote unquote checked the box or fulfilled a need, that they're going to do that forever and ever, amen, until the day we die. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's just not how we are as human beings. And we get ourselves into these very like suffocating, non-malleable, honestly, boring and unfulfilling places when we only not expect them not to change, but we also don't give ourselves like room to change and grow either. That to me is the exciting part, also scary part of relationships, is that
Yeah.
we evolve.
Yeah.
Give it space, give it breathing room to do so,
Yeah. I love that. Let it open up, like you let a good
Yes.
wine open up. You got to
Yes.
sometimes just like let it breathe, walk away, come back. Like it'll all be okay. Well, I could talk to you for hours, but I know that you juggle a lot and you're a busy,
Mm-hmm.
badass woman. So I want to finish with some rapid fire kind of type questions, and then you can tell everybody about your upcoming book, where they can listen to you, find you, buy your programs, all of that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So, what is a morning routine and a nighttime routine like non-negotiable for you? That could be like a health thing, it could be a mantra, it could be whatever.
That has changed a lot since I had a kid 2 years ago. I used to have a very, very strict morning routine and regimen. But I will say what my non-negotiable is. My non-negotiable in the morning is I wake up before anybody else. And that doesn't have to be hours. I'm not like, I'm actually not a morning person at all. My kid gets up every day at 6 o'clock, which like, shoot me, because that is like my worst nightmare. I'm not a morning person, but I very much train myself to get up at 5:30, even if it's just like 20, 30 minutes, because I want the house quiet. I want time to myself. I want to have a cup of coffee. I want to practice some mindfulness. I sit in the quiet by myself. And that's just how I start my day and set my nervous system up. for the
Love
day.
that. Quality
And
alone
then,
time.
yeah. And then nighttime, again, I think this has changed a lot in my 30s. I am very, very like committed to my skincare routine.
It's a
I feel like
lifestyle.
it really is. Partly, I feel like it's vanity, but also partly at this point, after doing it for so many years, I think it's actually almost like a mindfulness practice where it's like I have the routine. There's a ritual to it, right? It's like I have the process, I have the routine, there's the steps, and there's the time alone at night in the bathroom, undisturbed. And I think it might be maybe as that's the first time I've ever thought about it in that way, where I'm like, oh, that's my bookend actually to my day.
I'm so sick of people feeling like they have to say sorry for things that are not like, quote, guilty pleasures. Did you
Yeah.
kill anybody because you want to
Yeah.
put serum on your face? Like, no, we're trying to age like a porcelain doll over here. Pale is
Exactly.
making a
No
comeback.
shame.
This face will never see the sun again, is what I always
This,
joke. I'm like,
this face hasn't seen the sun since I was probably like 22. Like I have the biggest, most giant hats of all time.
same. I'm like, I will age like a porcelain doll, and I know people don't find that sexy, but I don't care. I'm going to look amazing.
Same girl,
There's
same.
that. Okay, what do you think is one of the best pieces of underrated marriage or relationship advice that you would maybe give to your younger self or give that you've heard over the years? An underrated piece of advice.
Ooh, underrated. God, building a sense of self in relationship. I think the most important thing constantly in relationship to other people is working on yourself.
Mm.
And so whether that's again, romantic relationship, friend, kid, relationship with your kids, working on yourself, challenging yourself, filling up yourself. It's that cheesy, like you can't pour from an empty cup saying, but it almost goes deeper than that. It's like, it goes back to who are you as an autonomous being? Like what makes you passionate? What gives you life outside of your relationships? Because if you can't find life and joy and passion and spark outside of your relationships, holy shit, is that a lot of pressure then to put on your relationships, right? And guess what? Relationships don't do well under that amount of pressure.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's a good one. Okay. What is a trend or a topic maybe that you're seeing or a buzzword in the mental health therapy world right now that you're hearing a lot about or seeing a lot about that you're just like, eye rolling? Because
All of
people
them.
are getting, I know, literally everything. All of TikTok.
How much time do we have?
A lot.
Codependency, toxic, narcissism. It's there's so many of them. I think again, going back to what we opened with, which is like, having the training, having the master's degree, having the hours, learning and studying the diagnostic manuals. The number of times people, gaslighting, that's another one that gets thrown around a lot. Using clinical terms outside of what they actually mean or without an understanding of what they mean, right? So narcissism, if I have to speak about one, probably drives me the most nuts, only because first and foremost, we're all a little bit narcissistic. Again, very human trait. But also like you can have narcissistic traits and doesn't mean that you're a narcissist. Yes. Right. And the other thing is that I love to tell codependents, because so many codependents are like, oh, I'm always in relationship with narcissists. Why am I always attracting narcissists? That's because codependency and narcissism are two sides of the same coin, my friend.
Yeah.
Hate to break it to you. A lot of codependent behavior is wildly narcissistic, because here's the thing. Both of them as a personality structure are other oriented. They both find their sense of self outside of themselves. So we need to look in the mirror a little bit more and stop pointing fingers, because a lot of times when we do, you just point it right back at yourself.
Yeah. What are we going to do about that instead of blaming it? Love that. Okay. I know that I think this was on your signature of your email. You said everything that you need to know you've learned through your journey, which great quote, right? So I think sometimes we are going through something in life that during the time, right? Hindsight is 2020, and it has a ripple effect on our life later in a positive way. So what in the journey that you've gone through, is there something, one of the toughest things or lessons that you've gone through maybe that actually had the most profound positive ripple effect later in your life that you're like now like, wow, really happy went through that? At the time, was not for me.
I mean, all of it. I don't know, like all of the quote unquote negative experiences, not to kind of like divert the question, but I really do believe, and this probably comes from my background in depth psychology, which is I really do believe that this idea of healing, this idea of our path of individuation really does come out of meaning making. We are creatures that like to make meaning as human animals. And this idea of like, oh, I'm healed, or I've recovered from something. I think so much of that actually looks like I'm able to pull meaning from and make meaning of something that happened in my life. Right. And I think, unfortunately, as a culture, because we know at an unconscious level that we need to make meaning, we try to force ourselves into a place of meaning before we're ready. And that is not the same thing. There is a feeling of peace and understanding that comes when you truly do get to a place of like, I understand this in the larger context of my life, of my place in the universe, right? What have you. And so I think so much of the things that have happened in my life, I have, through a lot of work and a lot of time, come to on its own, that place of meaning. And I would say like two of my hardest relationships / most fulfilling relationships / biggest heartbreaks at the time when I was in it, I wanted to just like rip my heart out and never be in a relationship again. And now I find so much joy when I reflect on them, even the ones that like ended really shitty and we don't really still have a connection. I don't regret it for a moment. It was such an important part of my life and my journey and who I am. But I didn't get to that piece without a lot of work to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes work. You know what I mean? Everybody
Mm-hmm.
wants the apple pie. No one wants to slice the apples. So you got to
Exactly.
do it
You got to
sometimes.
do
You got to do it.
it.
Okay, last question, and then you can tell everybody all the ways that they can work with you and find you. So, I know a lot of people, myself included, I love a good like mantra, or I have post-it notes places, or I call it the bumper sticker version of life. But what's maybe a mantra or a piece of advice that you want to leave people with, or something that you would love to say to your younger self that really like we all get stuck in life? It's when we need to get unstuck that maybe you would write on a post-it note.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, this might sound boring for some people, but it's probably very steeped in my meditation practice over the last 20 years. I really continually come back to just I am here. If I knew at, I don't know, 15, what I knew at, 25 or 28, when I first started diving into that world, my life would have been very, very different. And I think for me, the practice moment by moment, day to day, of finding joy in the I am here has transformed my life in so many ways, right? So I am the person who walks outside, and because I've made it a practice for so long, it does come easier to me now. And I say that because it is a muscle that people have to build.
Yes.
I could be having the shittiest day ever and be stressed out and feeling all the chaos. And I walk outside and I can smell the jasmine in the air, like in June, and it stops me in my tracks for at least a moment where I can just close my eyes and take a breath and be like, I love that smell. Like it just brings me joy, right? As just one example, it's like I'm really good at being like, everything pause. I am here. I find joy. Okay, now you can go back into your chaotic day, but like
I
at least
love
for that
that.
moment,
I love that. I think that's what we do need sometimes is like a snap out of it moment where it is just one sentence where we want to be philosophers all day long and
Yeah.
analytical and overthink. And it's like sometimes you just need, that's why like I think sometimes like my brother will give the best advice because I'll go down all these rabbit holes and he'll just say like, Bree, do it till it doesn't work anymore. Then you do something else. And I'm like, wow, I've been doing a dissertation on this for 25 hours and you just summed it up in a sentence. So I love that for
Gotta get
sure.
out of our own way sometimes.
I know, seriously. So how can people, and this will be in the show notes just so everybody knows, but how can people find you, retreats, the book, maybe tell a little bit about all the plugs that you want to plug? Please let us
Oh
know.
boy. Okay. So like I said, I have a book coming out. It's called It's Not Me, It's You. And pre-sale goes on and starts in May. So you'll find that in all the places, all the things. It's through HarperCollins. And then kind of launching out the gate in May, there's a lot happening. So I have a brand new site coming out because of a bunch of new offerings. So I'm going to have a massive online codependency course, which is really just pulled from all of my live teachings that I've been doing all through COVID, and realizing that, people in like Australia, for example, can't attend a live class. And so how can I make it accessible? So look out for that. It's going to be a doozy, but it is a very, very extensive course. You mentioned earlier, but I do have a mindfulness course. There's going to be a transition with that too, because I'm kind of re-recording, but I have an amazing mindfulness course that's pulled from mindfulness-based cognitive therapy around decreasing anxiety and depressive symptoms. I don't know. I'm on Instagram at Vanessa S. Bennett. I'm on TikTok at the Coda Yoda. I don't know, all the
Love it.
things.
And your podcast, where can people find
Yeah,
that?
podcast is cheaper than therapy, and you can listen to it at all the places. So Apple Podcast, Spotify Podcast, all those things.
Love it. Thank
Yeah,
you. I am so grateful for your time today. You are amazing. I can't wait to buy your book. I know it's going to be amazing. So I'm going to sign up for the sign up, all the alerts. And
there's got to be a lot of little fun giveaways and gifting too that we're doing. We're working with marketing now to come up with all these kind of fun strategies for people if you do pre-order. So definitely pay attention to May when it launches. If you're not following me, sign up for my email, all the things, because there's going to be some really fun incentives.
all the overachievers that are my followers will for sure be signing up for the pre-launch because everybody listens is an overachiever type A,
yeah.
whatever. So
welcome.
thank you so
my
much.
tribe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like attracts like. So
exactly. Thank you,
thank
Brown.
you.
I appreciate it.
Have a great day. Ciao.